Okay, so welcome to Sunday Sit. This is put on by the residents of the Monastic Academy, which is a full-time residential training program, training center to make leaders in both awakening and responsibility, as we call it, up in Lowell. Most of the group, including our teacher Suri, is on retreat right now, so I came down. My name is Peter. I'm the director of the center, so I'll be giving tonight's talk and guided meditation, and then do a Q&A. And anytime you feel like you want some water or a stretch or use the bathroom, feel free to make yourself comfortable and do whatever you need to do. I'll start with just like a 30-minute talk-ish, and then we'll do 2 periods of practice, mindfulness, and then we'll go into my favorite part, which is the group dialogue, group conversation. And yeah, nice to have everyone here on this snowy, wintry, hard to drive day. So, I was a little nervous because I was a little sick yesterday, and given a couple of talks here and now at this point, but this is the first time I'm talking about an American icon, someone that I think all of us probably have some relationship to, which is Martin Luther King Jr. And Suri in the last few weeks has been doing this theme of guruship on spiritual teachers, and I'll be sort of trying to weave both his life and legacy and good work and what we're trying to do at the Monastic Academy, and maybe arguably, in my personal opinion, why we could use more guru-like figures like Martin Luther King. So, Will told me just before the sit, actually, he has a very personal connection to this history, so I feel a little nervous of being like, I don't know as much as probably some of you might know in the room. So, if that's the case, hopefully my perspective on how he relates to the practice, mindfulness, and spirituality might be useful and beneficial in some way. Personally, growing up, I was really interested in figures like MLK and Gandhi and Mandela and these sort of spiritual, social activist leaders who seemed to both have a concern for all of humanity, all of the planet, and could also manifest that into concrete, effective action in the world, actually bring about positive change. And it's one of the reasons why I was really drawn to the Monastic Academy, where Suri also talks about learning how to integrate these wisdom, love, and power skills to become trustworthy so that we can not just do the right thing, not just want to do the right thing, not just know what the right thing is, but actually be capable of doing it. And it's really rare and challenging to do that. And so I've long been drawn to figures like this, and I was never really drawn to the idea of living in a cave for 10 years or something like that. Although that's become increasingly interesting to me. That wasn't my aspiration as a kid or anything. And so the past few weeks I've been doing some research and learning more and more about his actual life, from birth to death, and getting more and more of a sense of who he is beyond the way that we've sort of raised him up as this one-dimensional, often icon, without actually really knowing much of who he is as a person, who he was as a young person, what his progression over time was. In a weird way, I think a lot of us, at least when I was growing up as a kid in America, learned more about the early Martin Luther King than the later iterations of him, who was much more revolutionary and was really orienting towards almost like a Christ-like overturning of entire societal values and structures. And that was interesting to realize and read about. And the one thing that I really appreciate about him was that he really saw that he's not alone in this. All the spiritual leaders of all time have seen this, that doing good things matters. That there is good and there is bad, and there are consequences to doing good and there are consequences to doing bad. And even though it might not immediately play out, those consequences do happen over the long haul. Not to say that injustice doesn't exist, not to say that evil doesn't exist, but that we reap the actions that we sow. And so he could stand for truth, he could stand for love, he could stand for a moral ground, not just trying to gather power, not just trying to win, but actually standing for what's true and right, which in his life he was basically from every side, everyone disagreed with him. Obviously the white Southern racists weren't very happy with him, obviously. A lot of the urban African Americans like Malcolm X didn't understand what he was doing in the early days. Even his close allies were often jockeying amongst each other for what the correct action to do is. NW's AACP saw him as a challenger, and so for his entire life he was always at this sort of insecurity about these days it's easy to go, well, Jesus, Buddha, Martin Luther King, Gandhi, these people, of course everyone knew that they were right, and most of the people were on their side, and there were just some like bad people that didn't like them, and you just had to get rid of the bad people or something, or love them or something. But in fact, in the real world, when we're trying to do anything for real, everyone is in this debate, everyone is in this confrontation. What is the right thing to do? What is the right way forward? And there were many times where the news media and he himself was second guessing. Have I done all the good I was meant to do? Am I done? Am I doing the right thing? Should I just step back and let others take over for a while? And yet somehow, year after year, month after month, he continually persevered. Which is amazing when you realize that he started the Montgomery bus boycott when he was 26. I didn't realize that until recently. He was 26 years old and led a huge movement for over a year at age 26. Which, I have residents at the monastery that are 26, and they struggling not to burn the rice and beans. So it's amazing to me that he started so young and tragically died so young as well. And in this way, I think he aligns up with what Soryu often says about it's important that your actions matter, that if you do good, you reap good. If you do bad, you reap bad. For those of us who were around when Soryu did a year-long series on Peace Pilgrim, the American saint who, back in the 20th century, was fighting against nuclear war. At one point, she was captured by the FBI. It seems like the FBI was really bad in that thing. The FBI interviewed her, detained her, and asked her, what would you do if someone was going to murder you? And of course she laughed and said, well, that would never happen. So why are you asking me that? And they said, okay, but hypothetically, if someone was going to murder you, would you defend yourself? Would you attack them? Would you kill them? Or would you let yourself get killed? And she said, well, again, that's not ever going to happen. That would not happen. So why enter delusion? And after a few iterations, finally she consented to, okay, I'll play this game since you keep asking and I don't want to be mean to you. Let's say hypothetically, even though this would never happen, someone was going to kill me. What would I do? And she said, I would let them kill me. because if they kill me, all they're killing is this body that's going to die anyway, that's going to pass away, that's not reliable. But if I kill someone, then I'm harming my own soul. I would take on the consequences of having done that. Whereas if they kill me, well, I could die tomorrow. What's the big deal? And in the same way that MLK often fought against what he saw increasingly as what has actually come to fruition in my perspective, that this modern age, the 21st century age of materialism, this fascination of technology as the savior and solution to all problems, these mega corporations that basically rule the planet and buy the government, these values that talk to us that say that you're just a body. And of course, if we believe we're just a body, then it makes sense that we should maximize as much time as possible that we can live, and ideally live forever, as there are very smart, very wealthy people in the world trying to accomplish right now. But if you take a spiritual perspective where you realize this body exists, this body is real, I'm responsible for this body, I'm responsible for taking care of it, but it is a tool. It's something I'm responsible for, but it's not my master. It's not the end-all, be-all of my life. If we have that perspective, then we're able, to really face injustice, to really meet evil, to really put our lives to doing what's good, because, as Peace Pilgrim said, it's just my body. It's just this body that will pass away anyway. And during the civil rights, many people, including Martin Luther King, had to come face this on often a daily, weekly, monthly basis. The threat of violence, the threat of death. Many people died during this movement, fighting for what's right. And it's deeply scary. For those of us who haven't broken that attachment to the body, modern comforts and pleasures afford us the possibility to not have to directly confront the reality of our own passing away. It is, in a sense, putting us to sleep to not really face injustices in the world. Because we're so scared of protecting our imaginary money, so scared of protecting our temporary, unreliable bodies. Who's going to fight for injustice? And what was a little heartbreaking, I guess, but I think fits into this theme of guruship that Suri's been going on the last few weeks. Is that Martin Luther King wasn't a perfect human being. Gurus are not perfect human beings. Spiritual teachers aren't perfect human beings. For those of us who come from a Christian background, one of the fundamental doctrines of Christianity is that a human being playing God is delusional. And so having a perfected human being is not realistic. And likewise, Gandhi, Mandela, most people, if not all human beings, are not perfect. And Martin Luther King wasn't perfect by any means, at least by today's standards. Today's sort of outrage of trying to find and pinpoint everyone's tiniest foible, tiniest issue, and then discrediting them completely, he probably would not have survived the past few months. It's known and documented that the FBI under J. Edgar Hoover was very actively trying to end his activism. We're spying on him, we're tapping his phones, we're trying to undermine him. And to the credit of the press of the time, which wouldn't happen today, the press never released any of the tapes or information the FBI kept sending him about his extramarital affairs. That he was on the road over half the time and was under severe distress and found solace through having other partners on the road. That kind of thing wouldn't fly today. Today we would throw that person under the bus and say, because you're not perfect in every possible way, we're not going to trust you on anything. It doesn't say that having an affair is like good or anything. Obviously, we don't want that to happen. But it's funny. So a few weeks ago, I co-led a retreat in New York with one of my friends, Miles, and we were leading a bunch of college students. And afterwards, I was talking to one of them, and they said, it's interesting. When I was in college, all we learned was like deconstruction. So I had to like criticize and take apart other systems and just see all the flaws and everything, and see how it's not good. There wasn't much constructive building happening. And in a way that obviously has some benefits, but in a weird way, it's actually very disempowering, where we basically say, first, we need everything to be perfect, and then we take action. But in reality, if we look at Martin Luther King's life, for example, we see that things were often not perfect. He was just a young pastor. He was chosen as the leader of the bus boycott, not because of any particular talent or experience, but just because he was the newer pastor in town, and they nominated him because they were like, well, we don't have any beef with this guy, so he can be the leader. He was thrust into leadership at a very early time, and just did what had to happen. And there's one teaching that often comes up in spirituality that Story emphasizes over and over again, is that whatever experience, whatever our life is bringing to us, that's what we need to do. We need to address what's happening right now. And so many times we instead try to create this perfect image of what would a perfect teacher be, what would be a perfect community be, what would be a perfect partner, a perfect job. Now obviously we don't want to go to the other extreme where we just like put up with abuse and like willy-nilly just enter bad relationships and like stay at places that aren't good for us. That's just another form of doing this. But finding a way of how do we take empowerment and act, accept, and affect change in what's happening right now. This is the keystone of a lot of spiritual movements. And at the same retreat, so for the guided meditation portion tonight, I'm going to do the Brahma Viharas, which in Buddhism are roughly translated to divine abodes. They're ways of cultivating positive social feelings. And during the retreat, we were practicing one of these, and we were generating sympathetic joy. And so Miles was saying, develop sympathetic joy now to those you struggle with. We started with your friends and your family, and then we moved on to people that you normally have a hard time relating to or liking. And he gave some examples of people he's worked with in his mind to develop joy for. And one of the retreatants kind of objected and said, I don't think this person is bad. I don't think it's good to have sympathetic joy for them. Isn't this person bad? And she said, for me, I think it's better to use my energy to create an idea of what the best system would be and then make that into a reality. Not realizing that is basically the source of almost all evil in all of human history, is creating an idea of what I think would be the right thing and then get everyone else to follow. That's how a lot of justified, rationalized murder and genocide has happened over history. I have an idea, I thought it through. Everyone else should follow. Again, not to say that we don't use our minds. Minds are really good for problem solving, creating theories and ideas, just like our bodies. But there is an actual world. There's an actual people. There's actual nature and trees and plants and animals that are real, that are more real than our ideas and thoughts about the world. And so a lot of times when we're practicing a spiritual path, say mindfulness, we're trying to get back into a more real reality that is less of our own self-generated, fabricated sense of reality. And it's, in my perspective, this is my view, this is not advocated by Maple or Soryu or Buddhism or something. But from my perspective, in my limited experience, I grew up Catholic and did a lot of Christian things growing up, and then I switched and explored a lot of religions as I became older. And it's pretty clear to me that Asian spiritual traditions have done a really good job of learning how to cultivate the mind. Very systematically, over thousands of years, people are debating and figuring out, how do you work with this mind? How do you work with this heart? How do you work with this body? How do you do this internal alchemy that was present in Eastern traditions, but not as much. It's on YouTube now, so everyone's going to hate me, but whatever. But what I really like about, at least modern Christianity, the one that I grew up with, was that there's a really huge emphasis on service. So when I was in college, I went to New Orleans for a few weeks to help with reconstruction. And it was interesting to me that basically everyone doing reconstruction there was affiliated with a church. I was doing it as part of my university, but we were staying at a church. And so there's this internal alchemy of how do you train our minds to get more and more closer to reality. And then there's this path of service and love that just puts you in direct contact through necessity with a reality that's not you. As Soryu, I think, said here, or maybe he said it at Low, I don't remember. He said, one way to get out of your head is trying to help other people. Because if you're not actually seeing that person, if you're not actually being with that person, but actually with the idea of that person, they're eventually, or maybe quickly, going to give you feedback. Say, who are you helping right now? You know, what are you doing? And so likewise, one way we come to experience what Buddha called the reality of suffering is through service, is through good works. And there's a long tradition in pretty much every spiritual tradition of service and good works. But it's interesting to me that Martin Luther King basically spent his entire life, at least his adult life, 26 onward till he died, doing this. And what's most radical, most of us know about his Montgomery boycott for a year, and then he had some lukewarm campaigns in other places like Albany and other places, and then we know about Birmingham, and we know about Selma, and we know about these big things that led to huge changes for the country, that forced the country to morally look at itself, forced the White House, for John F. Kennedy and Lyndon B. Johnson, to really question, are we going to play the moderate and say this will be fixed eventually, let's not rock the boat, or are we going to really take a stand and do something about this now? And he forced the issue, he forced attention to say this, in a nutshell, is what is happening. What are you going to do? And it didn't always work very well. You know, Birmingham wasn't very successful early on until one of his aides had the radical idea of, let's bring all the kids in to march. And most of the people, including the elder African-American leaders in the community, were like, this is a terrible idea. How can you put kids to confront police with dogs and sticks and hoses and everything. But they were at the end of the rope where they needed something to succeed or the movement was going to die at the time. And so that was now what we know as the major success that everyone sort of has an image of their head. That those images were shown across the world and forced Congress and forced the White House to make radical changes. And so we know about that part of his life. But what's most interesting to me is towards the end of his life, his tragically short-cut life, he started having a very broad vision that was much more radical and much more didn't gain him sympathy or allies from pretty much anyone. That he was going to attack the very values and systems that the country and arguably the world was operating off of, that he called the Poor People's Campaign. And he was going to identify with all of the disenfranchised, all of the oppressed, regardless of color, regardless of nation, regardless of belief. And saw, again, that the earlier thing that we all know about I Have a Dream, basically seeing this vision of integration where people of different colors and walks of life can share the same bathroom and the same restaurant, which is beautiful and huge. Not to discredit that. But then he went 10 steps further and said, what is creating this system of oppression in the first place? What is making it so that some few people have all the wealth and all the power, and even they're unhappy and suffering, and then there's masses, billions of people that are treated as objects, they're treated as things. And this is where all of the deep spiritual teachers of all times, at least in my opinion, get to. Seeing every single living being as perfect, as worthy of love, of needing protection and encouragement, willing to put their life and challenge the very cultural assumptions, cultural values, cultural beliefs that all of us are just naturally, automatically inherit just by the nature of growing up into a human adult. He was going to challenge and question those very assumptions of the worship of money, of all the power going to these mega corporations, and most of his aides didn't really get it. He took a really early stance against Vietnam when it was still very popular among the country, and again, a lot of people didn't like him for that. He really reached a place where he was going to identify through God-given eyes, not through color of his skin, not through his nationality, not through his gender, not through any of those things, but really seeing a true equality, a true justice, a true peace for all beings. And we see now, in 2020, the fact that we didn't resolve that problem, that we didn't really face that question, has led to where we are today, where millions of people are going to die from climate change and are already dying, that entire species are getting wiped out, that this power that just went to these mega corporations that rule the world and that the government has become corrupted has only accelerated, that the distrust and basically everyone and everything, including ourselves, has only accelerated. And so just like Martin Luther King, more or less 100 years after Abraham Lincoln, now we're facing, roughly 60 years later, this next iteration of needing the entire world to reevaluate, reorient the unfinished work of what are the cultural assumptions, values, systems that we unquestionably count on, believe in, don't challenge, because for most of us, it's the very basis of our life to actually question those things. Most of us, our housing, our jobs, our friends, could be put in jeopardy if we start questioning that deeply. And that kind of deep questioning is similarly what brings us into real spiritual insight. When we're able and willing to question that deeply, when we care more about honesty and love than anything else, that's when we can start having spiritual breakthroughs, when the spiritual path becomes more and more real. And from my perspective, at least, his last unfinished work is something that the entire world is now inheriting, because if we don't finish that work, then we might not make it, or we might make it and it won't be a world that's potentially not worth living in. At least from my perspective, there are those who think that technology is, in a few years, is going to solve everything, and we're going to go to Mars, and things will be cool. But it's not my perspective. I don't think the facts line up with that either.